Hello, I'm out on my rooftop in Daejeon, South Korea to discuss Halloween because it's pretty close, and in Korea it's not much of a holiday, but where I'm from in Michigan, it's a major event for the entire month. So I'm actually a little bit homesick, so I thought this might help my homesickness by thinking about some memories of Halloween and things related to like my childhood with Halloween and just how much Halloween has changed over the years. So you can see in the back behind me there's a new building called Shinsege. It's pretty cool. And then back there is the sunset. So the rooftop here is very nice. I tried to film in a pagoda near here, but there were too many people, which is pretty typical for Korea. So I had to come up here, and hopefully it's not too dark because it's getting late. So anyway, I'll start like this. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Detroit, Michigan, and the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan. And during that time, Halloween was a major experience, a month-long experience. But just to give you a little background about that time, if you didn't grow up during then, it was kind of right in the middle of the Satanic Panic, which was this media outrage related to like heavy metal music and Dungeons and Dragons and definitely Halloween, horror movies. At the time there were many slasher films like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and all the derivatives of those. So there was a certain kind of fear in the air, which I think actually made the experience a little more magical in some ways. There was also a lot of fear of poison and razor blades in candy. I think something happened once, so the fear sort of perpetuated and became this big concern about checking the candy, which I think is kind of tame compared to these days. As far as I'm aware, I don't even think many kids go out for Halloween anymore in America. If they do, they probably go to a mall or like a more contained community where they know people or there's some kind of checks and balances with it. But when I was a kid, it was pretty raw. We would just go out and obviously hit our block, but you know, with as much time as we had, which was a few hours, we would try to get as far as we could in that amount of time within the vicinity of our neighborhood. So often this could be 4 or 5 blocks away, and you know, who knows who lived there. And there were definitely some scarier houses that we were afraid of and maybe didn't go to. But the thing is October in Michigan is a very magical time. So even like a month before, there was all this anticipation. And I think that is still the case. People go to like orchards, apple orchards, and on haunted hay rides to soak up the autumn atmosphere or feelings. And when I was a kid, it was no different. I used to love going to the apple orchard, and you'd get donuts or buy your pumpkins from there and take them home and carve them. I still carve pumpkins. Here's 2 of mine from a couple of years ago. I haven't done it yet this year, but I will do it soon. They're a little bit harder to find here, and when you do find them, they're a lot harder and smaller, so it's a bit of a challenge. Actually, a few years ago, we got some pumpkins and we cut into them and all these worms jumped out. It scared us like a lot. I was with a few girls at the time and they were just screaming and the worms went all over the floor, and I've never seen that. I've carved pumpkins for almost my entire life, and that's the first time I've ever seen something like that happen. So that was the first in Korea. But you know, the apple orchards and just the apples in Michigan is a big deal. Michigan is sort of known for apples and cherries. So if you go to an orchard in Michigan, it's really an experience. If you've never done so, I recommend it. And you know, the colors are all turning in the leaves, and there's just this feeling of change. So I think maybe that's something I definitely miss here. There's definitely a feeling that the weather is changing, but there are not as many trees as where I'm from, and they don't dramatically change as much as they do in Michigan. So there's that. But the feeling is still there to some degree. One of the things in the 80s that was kind of on our minds a lot was Devil's Night, which is, I guess it's a holiday, kind of. It's the night before Halloween, and it's this time where in the Midwest, it's called like a mischief night, where, you know, people will throw eggs at houses or put bologna on a car hood. Pretty nasty stuff, actually, when I think back on it. Toilet papering trees, things like that. That was like the innocent stuff. But because I lived in Detroit, which is a very defunct place, one of the traditions were the Devil's Night fires. If you've ever seen the movie The Crow, that's sort of the backdrop of what Devil's Night was like back then. And I remember on the television seeing, you know, a lot of the stuff. Neighborhood watches were always out at that time, and there was a lot of fear about it. And it kind of reached its peak in 1984 with almost 800 fires set in one night. So you can imagine in a city how many fires that actually is. It's quite a lot. And most of these are just abandoned houses, but some of them were bigger things like factories and other buildings. So these days that doesn't seem as much of a concern, but back then it was a really, I don't want to say oppressive thing, but I remember, you know, many people talking about it and this kind of fear surrounding it several weeks before, because sometimes people would start them, you know, the week before. It's almost like 4th of July, where people start lighting fireworks off maybe a week or two before. It was kind of similar. But, you know, it's very distinct for my hometown. So I do have a little nostalgia for that feeling, even though it's a very destructive thing. And I think that's the main thing, is in the 80s there was a lot of fear, and there's even more now in some ways, you know, with the pandemic and stuff. But as far as like fear of thy neighbor, that was a very big deal back then. If you've seen the movie E.T. or the TV show Stranger Things, those experiences with the kids of like going around on their bikes and going through the neighborhoods, that was very real. I think they captured it quite well. And I don't really think that can be done now. It's a certain trust in your children, I guess, that they can go out at night alone or just with their friends and walk around the neighborhood. I mean, thinking about that, if I was a parent, I think I would be very scared to do that. But my parents let me, and many other children's parents let them. So one thing that I really enjoyed about Halloween, I still do, is the costume aspect. I'm a very creative person, so I really enjoy that process of deciding what I'm going to be, sort of embodying something. And I've had many, many costumes over the years, and I usually make them or make part of them. And I think that comes a bit from my mother, because she's very creative also, and when I was a child she would help me sort of get my the idea I had in my head out because I didn't really know how to do it because I was so young. But some of the great costumes I had when I was a child, one of them was Ace Frehley, the guitarist from Kiss. I distinctly remember that costume. It was very fun. And I was also like a tree monster from this Hardy Boys book. And I actually won an award for that at a Cub Scout Halloween contest. But my mom helped me make it out of paper mache, and you know, it was like this big tree monster, so it was really heavy. I had to carry it around, but it was pretty cool. And over the years I've done like Star Wars costumes and couples costumes before, like with my ex-girlfriend as like I was a mummy and she was Cleopatra, or Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. One year I was the Joker, long before The Dark Knight, and my girlfriend was Harlequin, but the old Harlequin, not the newer one, the one with the more jester type outfit. That was a pretty cool costume. But you know, the thing I like about the costumes is you kind of get to take on this personality, and since I'm into the occult quite a lot, I like that aspect of it. It's almost like a spirit animal or some kind of thought form that you are embodying for a limited amount of time. Anyway, I think that's about it. I'm just gonna say a happy Halloween to everyone back in the USA and everyone out in the world, I guess. So have a good Halloween. Take care. Bye-bye.